others who weren't able to attend today to be able to view this at a later time. And also, we will be using the question and answer feature. So if you do have a question that comes to mind during the presentation, please click on the question and answer button on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will strive to address all questions as time allows. So now with that housekeeping covered, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kimberly Flint-Hamilton, St. Lawrence University's Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion, who will be leading us in our learning today. Kimberly joined St. Lawrence in January of 2017 and quickly got to work in addressing the needs illuminated by the 2014 Presidential Commission on Diversity. Important strides have been made for the St. Lawrence community thanks to her leadership and the work of the Diversity Committee. So thank you, Kimberly, for braving the Canton winters, supporting every Laurentian, and leading us in a conversation about community and inclusion.
So thank you so much, Victoria. Again, my name is Kimberly Flint-Hamilton. You can please call me Kimberly. And I want to echo what Victoria said. And thank you all for spending your time with us this evening. I know there's a lot going on with colleges and schools across the nation opening, and there's so much other stuff going on in our lives that the fact that you're spending this hour with us is very meaningful to me. It means that I know that you're committed to raising your awareness about this. So Joe and Victoria asked me to put together a webinar series on diversity and inclusion, and I was very happy to do so. And this is the first installment, a conversation about community and inclusion. And this conversation is designed to provide a kind of basic understanding of what diversity and inclusion is and why it's important. Here we go. So we have several goals for this afternoon's session. We want to talk about why cultural diversity is important in an organization, including higher education, the importance of inclusion, the hallmarks of a healthy, inclusive community, the importance of communication, particularly cross-cultural communication, to achieving inclusion. I'm going to provide a few suggestions on how to foster inclusion, and then at the end I have a few resources I want to share with you. But before we get too far along, I want to just talk about some guidelines for a healthy discussion. I know this is a webinar and we're not really face-to-face or engaging very much outside of the question and answer session, but these are guidelines to help guide your discussion, not just this evening, but in the future, especially when you're talking about topics that are sometimes difficult, like diversity and inclusion topics. And so first of all, be respectful of the people that you're talking with. Listen actively. You know, a lot of times when people are engaged in conversation, they treat it more like a debate, and they're focused more on, you know, sort of planning what they're going to say in response instead of listening to what the other person is saying to them. So I'm going to ask you to forego that and listen actively and try to understand what people are saying and where they're coming from. And speak from your own experience. And remember that it's okay to challenge ideas as long as you do so respectfully. We don't have to agree, right? But when we disagree, it's important that we acknowledge each other's humanity and treat one another with as much respect as we can. When you hear other people's experiences, and if they don't resonate with your experiences, try to avoid reinterpreting or invalidating someone else's story with your spin on it. And remember, our goal is to come to a deeper understanding, not necessarily to agree with one another. Education is strongest when diverse perspectives and voices are shared and heard. This has been recognized for a long time in higher education. In fact, if all we ever did was repeat what we already knew, we'd lose out on opportunities to learn anything new. Having a little trouble with my bar here. There we go. And so this little cartoon may be a bit cliche, but I think it's actually a pretty good metaphor for why diversity is important. And I'm sure you've probably all seen versions of this before. If you put a group of people in a dark room, or if you blindfold them, people who've never seen an elephant before, and then ask them to describe the elephant, each one will describe it from their own perspective. And so if you're close to the tail, you may say, oh, this is like a rope. Or if you're next to the ear, you may say, oh, this is more like a fan. And no one person gains the full perspective or the full picture. So to get a more complete understanding of the elephant, you need to incorporate all the perspectives. And the same thing is true for cultural diversity. You need different perspectives informed by different backgrounds and experiences to gain a more complete understanding of the realities in which we live and to have a chance to solve the complex problems that the world throws at us. Here we go. A few years ago, Scientific American published this article called How Diversity Makes Us Smarter. And the author concluded that when you're working with people whose backgrounds are different from yours, you tend not to make the same assumptions that everyone will share your opinions or that everyone's knowledge or understandings are the same. Now, on the one hand, this tends to make us more uncomfortable, at least initially. But it also means that team members will work harder to find evidence to support their points of view, for example, and to clarify what they mean. So working in diverse teams ultimately makes us smarter by forcing us to do our homework more thoroughly, to work harder, and ultimately by forcing us to tap into our various forms of creativity and to articulate how we understand things much more effectively. A year or so later, Harvard Business Review published this article called Why Diverse Teams Are Smarter. The authors pointed out that diverse teams tend to focus more on facts. They process facts more carefully, and they're more innovative. And these are some of the reasons why diverse teams tend to make better decisions than teams that lack diversity. Then Forbes magazine published this finding from a study commissioned with McKinsey & Company. And what they found was that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity outperform their competition by 15%. And those in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity outperform by 35%. So even setting aside social justice arguments for diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity has quantifiable and financial impacts that are really impossible to ignore. And this data is not lost on employers. The American Association for Colleges and Universities sponsored this study a few years ago. More and more employers are recognizing that their new college graduate hires need to have experience working in diverse communities with people from different backgrounds and on teams with people whose backgrounds and experiences and viewpoints are different from their own. And employers value those new employees who have demonstrable skills, solving problems with people with views, with people who have worked with other people whose views are different from their own. Now, I know this is hard to read, but you can find it on the President's website. This slide shows SLU's University Diversity Statement, which was written after the President's Commission on Diversity concluded its work in 2014. It was endorsed with enthusiasm by Alumni Executive Council, and it was approved by the Board of Trustees on October 24th, 2015. Now, I have to tell you that this statement is one of the reasons that I decided to come to St. Lawrence, especially the statements that I've highlighted in blue, and I'll read just a couple of those statements for you. The very first one, the recognition that it's not just students who learn in a community like St. Lawrence, but we are all of us together, a community of learners. That's why we're doing this webinar series, right? The second one, we believe that students, faculty, and staff from a variety of backgrounds, experiences, identities, and heritages, when working together, are more likely to produce the leaders our society needs. That really was a profound statement to me. And then I'm going to go to the last one at the bottom. We are willing to risk difficulty and discomfort in working toward achieving these goals. And for me, that was very important because it acknowledges that the work of diversity and inclusion is hard work to do, right? It requires forcing us to think about our experiences even if they're very different from other people's experiences, incorporating all the experiences. And that can make us uncomfortable at times. So this is a statement of the university's values and commitment to diversity and to creating an inclusive community. And it's one of the strongest value statements that we have. Now, it's important to note that diversity and inclusion are different things. Cultural diversity is about the range of human differences, including race, ethnicity, sex, gender, and so on, many of the things listed here. But inclusion is about engagement. In an inclusive community, all members are valued and respected. Voices are heard, and even when people don't agree with one another, they treat one another with respect. Cultural awareness expert Renee Myers has this to say about inclusion. She says, diversity is being asked to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. Now, according to Forbes, diversity without inclusion is useless. But the reality is, I think it's probably worse than useless. It's actually damaging. Diversity without inclusion is actually tokenism. In exclusionary businesses and educational environments, attrition can be very high. People are not willing to work or to pay for an education if their voices aren't being heard and their concerns aren't being addressed. Not only can it be very costly, but in the social media world, it can become very public and embarrassing. Last year, the very first book that we had in our Diversity and Inclusion Book Club was Jennifer Brown's book called Inclusion, the New Workplace. And Brown tells the story of Leslie Miley, pictured here, who in 2015 was the only Black engineer at Twitter who was in a leadership position. Now, at the time, about 30% of Twitter's users were either Black or Hispanic, but they only made up about 6% of Twitter's workforce, and that's combining technical and non-technical roles. And Twitter had spent a lot of time developing an image of inclusivity. They had Black Lives Matters flags posted on the walls of their offices. They hosted events to support a value of gender and racial equity, but they weren't making the effort to hire employees that attempted to match the demographic of their users. So Leslie Miley here approached the leadership and asked what could be done about this. And the other leaders agreed they were going to try to do something about it. But a lot of time went by, more than a year went by, and there were no results. They were blaming the pipeline, but not even doing anything to sort of massage the pipeline to help address the issue. So they kind of shrugged it off, and Miley resigned very publicly. Not only did Twitter lose a valuable employee, but Miley's departure was public and embarrassing for the organization. And this is just one example of creating an image of inclusion, but not following through on actions. Some of you may remember Derek Bell and his public departure from Harvard Law School for some of the same reasons. And there are quite a few less prominent individuals who leave their positions quietly because they don't think their organization takes their concerns seriously or is working hard enough or doing enough to create an inclusive environment. Now, we don't want to lose students and faculty and staff here at St. Lawrence for some of those same reasons, right? So we're working very hard to address this. So what are some of the hallmarks of a healthy, inclusive community? And so I've listed 5 things here that we can consider. First, everyone has what they need to thrive, and this includes both material resources and also access to collaboration and honest feedback, as well as the opportunity to grow. Community members can talk openly with one another. There's mutual trust. People can share their experiences and their perspectives honestly, and they aren't afraid to share their vulnerabilities. All members contribute and contributions are recognized. Cultural identity is seen as an asset. People are willing to listen to one another and seek to understand one another. And again, I keep coming back to conflict because all social groups have conflict, right? So even when there's conflict, disagreements are more respectful, and there's a desire to gain a better understanding of one another. And finally, a desire to maintain and restore community after a conflict. Even after we disagree again, we want to be able to work together collegially. We want to be able to understand one another. Now, there's so much going on in today's context with the shootings of all these people I've listed above just in the past few months. And then when you layer on killings that have taken place in the past few years, the list gets very depressing. The list is far, far too long. And then when you consider COVID and the disparate racialized impact of the disease and the death rate on populations where there are people of color, and the protests all over the world, there are a multitude of voices that are crying out to be heard. And leaders across the nation could do a lot of good if they just sat down together and listened and tried to put their heads together to meet the needs that are being expressed. But that's easier said than done. Cross-cultural communication is often very difficult, and this is in part because of the social networks that we create for ourselves. So a survey that was conducted in 2013 came to the conclusion that 75% of white Americans have homogeneous, white-only social networks and no meaningful contact with people who aren't white. Blacks and Hispanics tend to have broader and deeper social networks with people who have more diverse social identities. And so the conclusion that the authors drew was that most white Americans virtually only talk with other white Americans, with not that many exceptions. Scholar and psychologist Beverly Tatum wrote in her Why Are All the Kids, Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria text, she wrote, white people are not socially positioned to understand the experiences of people of color, in large part because they're not part of their social networks. And we see evidence of that at St. Lawrence. This slide shows one of the most significant takeaways from the SLU Climate Survey of 2018. And it shows, and I know probably many of you have seen this slide before, but this was a profound point for me. 91% of the respondents were comfortable interacting with diverse groups of people. 90% agreed that diversity enhanced experiences on campus, but only 67% were comfortable sharing their views of diversity at SLU, especially with groups whose identities were different from their own. And this is especially true regarding race, as we learned from the focus groups that we conducted in fall 2019. The focus groups also revealed that the figure of 67% is probably inflated. The topic of fear when having conversations about diversity and inclusion with people whose identities are different from your own came up in virtually every focus group we conducted. So this fear is very widespread on our campus. And here are just a few narrative comments from the climate survey and from the focus groups. So a student wrote, most students coming from the mainstream are afraid to discuss issues because they don't know about them. We need more of a dialogue between members of different groups. And another student wrote, sometimes I feel nervous to speak or reach out to someone I view as diverse from me because I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. And then a faculty member wrote, you can't just walk into a classroom to engage in a topic on diversity. I am fearful of litigation for saying something wrong. So with all this fear and uncertainty, how do we go about fostering inclusion? What are some tangible things that we can do to foster inclusion? And so here are just a few suggestions. Creating more opportunities for dialogue, especially across difference. Implement solution to community issues. Conduct frequent audits to make sure that you're on track and set inclusion goals. So I'm going to talk about each one of these. I'm going to spend about 30 seconds on each one. So creating more opportunities for dialogue. So we did some of this past June when we did our community forums. We had a forum for alums, and we also had one for students and one for faculty staff. And at those forums, we shared some of the work that we've been doing, but we also heard what people had to say and took some suggestions. This webinar series that we're doing right now, this is part one of a multi-part series where we talk about some of the challenges, but also I hope to hear some suggestions and some feedback from the folks who participate. Conduct focus groups. We continue to do more of that work as the year unfolds. And Thelmo just, I think last year, made a resolution to require student organizations that were budgeted at a certain level to plan events across difference. In other words, to collaborate with other clubs and organizations whose membership had members that were largely from identity groups different from their own. And so plan events with other folks and work together and talk together. Implement solutions to community issues. When community members voice their concerns about issues, listen to them and try to address those concerns. And one of the ways we do that is through the bias incident reporting process. We are beginning our 3rd year of that. And when community members report that they believe they've experienced bias or witnessed it or discrimination, we reach out to the reporters if they're not anonymous. And we try to find a way to resolve this situation, either by encouraging dialogue, or if it's a particularly egregious situation, by submitting it to the appropriate investigative judicial body. Another example is the Black Laurentian Initiative. A group of African descent students this past summer got together and wrote a letter expressing to President Fox and the Board of Trustees some of their painful experiences on campus and suggesting a series of actions that would address their concerns. It was a very thoughtful process. It was very professional and very collaborative. And now we're working on finding ways to address those actions, and we have plans to address, I think, virtually every action that they recommended. And so they took a moment to say what their challenge was, and now that we have dialogue and we know more, we have an opportunity to grow together. Conduct frequent audits to figure out where you are. We did a climate survey in 2018, but that's not the last climate survey that we're planning on doing. We're planning another one after the Strategic Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan has had time to mature. That's not concluded yet. We're still working on that, but we'll be in a position to share that with the community in the coming weeks. Town halls. We had several town halls this past summer with students, and we'll have more of those this year, and more community forums. And also assessing programs, collecting data from individuals who participate in programs to get some of their feedback, but also do assessments to find out whether the programs that we're launching are having the impact we hope for. For example, one of the things that we're planning this year is to assess our Diversity 13 requirement that hasn't been formally assessed yet. There was a pilot assessment that took place a few years ago. But, you know, is the Diversity 13 requirement doing what we imagined it would do when it was created? So we're going to have an opportunity to answer that question, hopefully soon. Excuse me. And set inclusion goals, understanding that we all may be starting this work at different places, but we should be moving in the same direction, even if we're moving at slightly different rates. So for one thing, we want to ensure that all incoming students and student leaders have diversity and inclusion training. So to accomplish that goal, we commissioned a diversity and inclusion online course that all incoming students are supposed to take this year. Most have already taken it, and to do more diversity and inclusion work for orientation programming. Providing resources to teaching faculty and staff so that they have what they need to do a good job in their classroom. And so I have several programs that I and members of the Diversity Committee have worked together to develop. We had several programs that were dialogues on race this summer. I have a Navigating a Tense Classroom series that I put together with several faculty members. And there's also a group of faculty called CARE, and CARE is an acronym for Committed to Action for Racial Equity. This is a group of faculty and staff who are trying to work hard to figure out ways to provide resources and support to faculty all over campus. And partnering with the Canton-Potsdam community. We've been doing a lot of work over the past couple of years, but especially this past summer, that work has really intensified. And we've been inviting members of the local business communities to have conversations with the chief diversity officers of all the associated colleges. We've done that several times. And this past summer, we had several discussions with local Canton and Potsdam elected officials and law enforcement. So what are some things that you can do to foster inclusion? So the first thing is to think about gaps in your own knowledge or comfort zone. If you think about the conversations that you avoid that are about race or about sexual orientation or about any issues of identity, why are you uncomfortable? Is it because you don't know enough? You can fix that. You can learn more. Is it because you don't know that you're not going to say the wrong thing? Do your best to not make a mistake, but when you do, because you probably will, I still make mistakes, right? When you make mistakes, apologize genuinely and try to learn. For students, I ask students to look for opportunities in their residence halls and through their student organizations and by working with me on the diversity committee to collaborate with other students, to participate in workshops and trainings, and to reach out to people who are different from you respectfully. And again, practice having those conversations. For faculty, I ask faculty to look for ways to include course content about equity or engaging different points of view in the classroom, especially people from underrepresented identities. Talk with students to make sure that they know that you value their perspectives. And understand that all students come to this work with different skill sets and different comfort levels. Make sure that they know that you're accessible and a resource for them, and that you want to help them learn, not that you're just going to chastise them for making mistakes. And I ask staff members to find ways to engage with their co-workers and to engage with the diversity committee and other folks on campus to raise your awareness about identity and equity and inclusion. And if you're an alum, you can participate in forums like this one. Again, educate yourself about issues of diversity and inclusion, attend webinars, read books, articles. And I can't emphasize this enough, talk with people. If all you're doing is reading, right, you might be doing a great job of expanding your awareness, but until you actually practice, you're missing an opportunity to learn how to engage thoughtfully. You can read all the books in the world about how to ride a bike, but until you get on that bike and start pedaling, you don't really know what it means to do that. So learn and then do what you can to do. And also talk with Joe and Victoria and Career Services to learn how you can be supportive to students as an alum. And talk with me. I can give you some ideas too. Now I have some resources, and I'm not going to read through these because I know that you probably can't even see these very well. These are resources that I've used in my work that I've found to be very helpful. It includes some books and some journal articles and some Chronicle of Higher Education articles and a few websites as well. I am in the process of putting together my long list of resources into a more user-friendly format to post on the Diversity and Inclusion website that you can access too. But for now, here are some really interesting things that might be useful. And there are also some short videos on inclusion. Most of these are only about maybe 10 or 15 minutes. A couple of them might be a little bit longer. But these are great things. They're engaging and they're fun to watch and they're educational as well. Now I want to spend these next few minutes addressing some of the questions that were sent to me ahead of time. And I apologize in advance because I don't think I'm going to be able to get to every question, but I'll try to get to the ones where I had multiple questions that were sort of along the same theme. So one of the questions that I got had to do with what are some of the things that I do to support departments, including the math and sciences. So I already talked about some of the things that I do, some of the workshops and programs that I put together, but I also schedule visits with faculty during their departmental meetings. Faculty meet on a regular basis in their departments, and the departments tend to be fairly small, like maybe, in most cases, 10 or 12 faculty to a department. And I try to meet with departments once a year if possible, and talk to them about what concerns I'm hearing from others, from students especially, what initiatives I'm developing, and I listen to them and hear some of their concerns, and I try to work with them on trying to address some of those concerns. I also participate in department chairs meetings that hear what some of the themes are that all the departments are dealing with. I already said that I develop workshops. I continue to develop more workshops. We have a very active intergroup dialogue program that's coordinated by Dr. Mary Jane Smith that does a great job of bringing together to groups of people who have different identities to have them learn how to engage together in productive ways. And as far as the sciences go, I want to say that the work of cultural diversity is something that the social sciences have been doing for a long time, and the humanities have been doing, for a fairly long time too. But in the academy, broadly speaking, in the academy, the physical and natural sciences have come to this work a little more slowly. For example, gender diversity is still a challenge in many disciplines, but they're making progress. And here at SLU, the sciences have been engaged in this work, and they're making progress. It's steady, and there's still a lot of work to do, not just in the sciences, but across all the departments. And we do this work one step at a time. I had a couple of questions about the concept of reverse chauvinism or reverse discrimination. And this is the idea that some organizations participate in preferential hiring based on racial or gender identity. And I want to be clear about this. We don't make any hiring decisions here at St. Lawrence based on race, sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity. We don't select anyone based on these criteria. What we do is think about our values, including, for example, a commitment to mentoring young people, a desire to work collaboratively with others, and, of course, the values reflected in the university diversity statement. And we develop selection criteria based on the needs of the position that's being filled and on our institutional values. And then we ask candidates for positions to explain how they meet these criteria. We do a fair amount of work, especially in recent years, in the last couple of years since I've been here. We've worked very hard on expanding candidate pools so that we have people applying who come from a wide variety of identity groups. And I want to also say that I'm not directly involved in admitting students, but I do collaborate with our VP of Admissions, Florence Hines. And their approach to bringing in a student body is similar in that they don't select students because of race, but we do look for students who have experience and a passion for the work of diversity and inclusion. So far this process has been effective. We've gotten some really exciting, top-notch people, and we've begun diversifying our faculty as well as our staff and student body, although there's more work to be done. But I can say with honesty and with experience that when we take steps to diminish or remove implicit bias from our selection processes, we found that we have really exciting and positive results. I also had a couple of questions about diversity of thought. And this is a reference to the tendency of colleges and universities to focus on diversity of social identity rather than on how we think. And I want to start out by saying that colleges and universities are all about diversity of thought. We have close to 50, maybe more, major and minor programs here at SLU in dozens and dozens of departments. And each department has specialists in several different subdisciplines. So we do diversity of thought and we do it well. But I realize that that doesn't fully address what's at the heart of the question, which is, I believe, why aren't we focusing more on political differences? So much of the work of the Presidential Commission on Diversity has been and continues to be a guiding force in our work. And I want to read just a little short section of that report, which you can also, I believe, find online on the President's website. So I'm reading from page 2 of that report. The measures of diversity that we focus on include race, but now equally consider gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, socioeconomic status, geography, religion, physical and mental challenges, and more. In the new normal, successfully diverse colleges and universities do not merely improve retention rates and enrollment rates, but engage their populations in ways that promote excellent teaching and learning for everyone in the community. Now, in terms of hiring, as I mentioned earlier, we don't ask candidates to disclose their political affiliations or identities any more than we do about race or sexual orientation or gender identity. And that means that we don't select for political difference, no matter what side of the political aisle you may see yourself on. But we also recognize that political difference has become a very heated and complex topic to engage. And just like for the other identities that I listed, we do develop programming that addresses this challenge as well. And one example is a grant-funded program we started last year called Civic Dialogue Around Political Difference. And this is a program that brings students together across political affiliation. So we have students who are politically liberal and students who are politically conservative, and they use a version of intergroup dialogue pedagogy to engage conversations around these topics. Like I said, it started off last year, and we're just now starting to pick it up where we left off. And so what these students do is focus on what they have in common. And I've been really, really impressed with this group. I had a question about cancel culture. And I believe this is a reference to calling out or shaming culture. When someone says or does something that is believed to exhibit bias or discrimination, rather than taking that person aside and having a private conversation with that person, which would be calling in, right? People get together and publicly denounce them, maybe calling for that person's termination or resignation or some other form of public shaming. Now, my personal preference is always to try to raise awareness and give people an opportunity to grow. We all come to this work from different places, right? And for some people here tonight with me today, this event may be the first opportunity that you've had a chance to really think deeply about any of these topics. But while other people in this group might have been doing this work for a very long time and you already know everything I've said, and maybe you're even a little bored right now. But when it's possible, I try to give people room to grow. And that also means room to make mistakes and hopefully learn from those mistakes. That's sort of my guiding principle. But that's not always possible. There are times when people's lives or people's health are at risk. And by refusing to change the way that we go about doing our work, or change the way that we train people, or accept responsibility for toxic actions or toxic inactions, right? People could die, people could get sick, people could get injured. And in cases like that, it might be appropriate to band together and say something publicly. You know, I think about Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott. Without that public shaming, would we have come as far as we've come with the civil rights movement? And the same thing is true for Martin Luther King Jr. He called out racial injustice and did a fair amount of shaming. And because of that, we're in a better place. And I'm gonna reference Nelson Mandela too. Without him, would apartheid have ended when it did? Or would we maybe still be dealing with that? Sometimes voices have to be loud and more strident in order to call important attention to issues that affect people's lives. I want to emphasize here that I'm talking about peaceful protest. I do not and would not advocate for violence. I think this is probably a good stopping point. And so I know that people may have questions that they've posted in the question and answer box, and I want to give people a chance to voice their questions. I don't want to take up all the time with my talking, but I want to apologize in advance because I might not have the answers to all your questions. I'll answer your questions as I'm able, and if I don't have the answer, I'll do my best to find it and get back to you.
Awesome, thank you, Kimberly. So I know that we have two questions that came up. So the first one is from Eileen Raymond, and she writes, as a Canton community member, I am concerned about the reports that students or faculty from diverse groups, especially when that diversity is highly visible, feel unsafe in our village. Do you have any insights into these reports and how we might move toward a more inclusive village for all, where all feel safe and valued?
That's a really good question, Eileen, and I want to thank you for asking it. This is a problem that has been on my mind since the first day I set foot on campus in 2017. We've been doing a lot of things. So let me back up. You wanted to know, first of all, did I have any insight into whether or not it was true? Yes, I have some insight. It is true. This is information that we've gotten from the bias incident reporting process. I've gotten reports. You know, the bias incident reporting process is not just about what people experience on campus. I encourage people to report things that they experience when they're in the Canton or Potsdam community as well. I might not be able to do anything about that, but I want to know something about what the context is and what the environment's like. Because I have been working for the past probably 2 years or so. I've been working with the chief diversity officers from Clarkson and SUNY Potsdam and SUNY Canton to address, not only to work together and collaborate more and share resources more, which is fantastic, but also to try to figure out a way to address this challenge in our communities. Our students sometimes don't feel welcomed in stores. I've had reports of people being called, horrible names when all they're trying to do is walk to the store or take a walk with a friend. I've had reports of people walking down Main Street and having things thrown from cars at them. So I hear all kinds of things. Now, these things I'm not hearing these things every day. Although the climate survey report some of the students who submitted their responses to that report will say that they have experiences with microaggressions or macroaggressions every single day. And we'll have a program on that later, I think. And so it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking that our students and our faculty staff don't feel safe basically in their own backyards, in their own neighborhoods. We are working on that. One of the things that we were doing over this past summer with local law, with the Canton and the Potsdam local law enforcement and with the mayor's offices, talking about some things that we can do. I worked to raise awareness about these challenges. I worked with some colleagues at Clarkson and SUNY Canton this past summer to put together a workshop for our campus safety and security offices. And so we had several programs where the safety and security officers came and listened and heard some of the challenges that we had and got some suggestions of things that they could do. I think the main thing is to raise awareness and to make people know that some of the behaviors or some of the things that they say that they might have thought were harmless, maybe even jokes or just fun things, have a hurtful and maybe devastating impact on our 18 to 20-year-old student body who comes here, and there's not a lot of people maybe who look like them, and they don't feel safe. And so raising awareness and then just working hard to, one baby step at a time. And I think that we're making progress. But of course, we can do more in our own communities than we can in the Canton-Potsdam community. And so we continue to brainstorm on ways to address this. I can tell you that the Canton, the Potsdam, and St. Lawrence County, I think this is true. And Joe, maybe you would know if I'm saying this right. Over this past summer, all three wrote resolutions supporting supporting Black Lives Matter and our Black students and faculty. So Joe says, yes, that happened. So I wasn't sure I got all the people, but certainly those people. And so we are making progress. It's just slow. Culture change takes a long time.
Awesome, thank you, Kimberly. So our next question is from Eben Grisby from the class of 1999. And he writes, will the Black Laurentian initiative involve connecting Black alumni who may be able to help mentor with current students and recent alumni?
That's a good question. Thank you for that. I don't remember, so I'm going to grab my letter and see if I can see if that's one of their actions. I don't think that was one of their actions. Let's see. They wanted more reflection. They wanted a fund.
Kimberly, if I might jump in while you take a look. First and foremost, I want to say hi to Eben. Good to see you, my friend. Joe Keniston here, class of 2005, everyone. I have the pleasure of working alongside Victoria and Kimberly as the director of Laurentian engagement. And this is a great question. It's something that we've heard from many of our students of color, many students from the LGBTQIA+ community and international students alike. trying to find ways to connect across identity versus across careers. And our career services team does an outstanding job in that way. And so what we've done is launched a platform called Laurentian Connection. We've had about 3,000 Laurentians join the platform thus far. And on that platform, we've set up different groups around identity. And Kimberly's been kind enough to help us make sure that our verbiage is correct and strong, to make sure that it is a safe place for students across various identities to connect with alumni and parents and others who identify as they do, so that they can find mentorship, they can have questions answered across identity, that as they transition into the workforce, as they look to relocate after St. Lawrence, we want to offer and streamline those connections as best we can. I will put that website in the chat so that you have the opportunity to visit that and sign up. And we are looking forward to only strengthening that for the years to come.
Thank you, Joe.
So our next question, Kimberly, that has come in is talking about flags on campus. So the specific question is, could there be a possible ban on racist and white supremacist tied flags like the Confederate flag or the Blue Line flag, that those types of flags cannot be displayed in any way on campus?
I think this is a multifaceted question. So first of all, you may know, some of you may not know, that we initiated this summer a new flag of symbolism policy in student life. John Robert O'Connor and I worked together on this in response to student requests that we consider something like this. And so what we ended up developing was a process by which if a student wants a certain flag to be displayed, they have to submit a proposal for that. And they have to demonstrate that the symbols that the flag represents align with St. Lawrence University values, okay? And so I don't know if I'd go so far as to say we would ban this flag and that flag, right? There are certain flags I'm sure we would ban, right? But the onus is on the students or the other groups to demonstrate that that flag aligns with our values. And at this point in time, I can't see a scenario that would successfully result in displaying, say, a Confederate flag on campus, because St. Lawrence's values don't align with the values of the Confederacy. So but I will also say that there's a committee of individuals that include John Robert O'Connor, a member of the diversity committee. It could be me, but it doesn't necessarily have to be me. And other people in student life are going to be responsible for making those decisions. So I would be very surprised if a flag that represents values of separatism or hatred or something like that would ever get approved. That would be, I doubt that would ever happen. I hope I've answered your question.
Thanks, Kimberly. Our next question is from Elizabeth Drollet, who states, quantitative measures can be illustrative of the state of diversity at an institution. And so what is the percentage of students of color and faculty of color at St. Lawrence?
So I have that data right in front of me. So I can tell you that as of last fall, so we haven't done the student census yet, so we don't have the census numbers for this fall. And when I say census numbers, what I mean is so many students were admitted and were accepted, right? But we don't know how many students are actually going to physically show up until they've had time to get here and get to their rooms. And so I can tell you that class of 2024, this incoming class, was very diverse. 14% of the class of 2024 were domestic students of color, and 10% of the class of 2024 are international students. And both those numbers are up from last year. They may be the highest that we've ever had. But as of last fall, we had about 12.7% domestic students of color and about 9.5% international students. And those, and I'll break that down for you. 5.2% of our students identify as US Hispanic or Latino. 3.9% identify as US Black. 1.7% US Asian. 0.2% US Native American. 1.7% multiracial or other. And 77.0% US white. Now, so those are our numbers. And when the President's Commission on Diversity report was written, when it was submitted back in 2014, the authors of that report envisioned that we'd have made more progress by now. We have made progress, but we're not at 20% domestic students of color, for example, which was the number that was sort of bandied about in the report. We could get there, but again, it's going to take time. We have to make sure that we have resources to support the students that we bring on, both financially and in terms of programming. So those numbers have increased in the past 3 years since I've been there. I've seen them go up, go up, go up, but they're going up in small steps. As far as faculty, so let me back up for faculty. The percentage of domestic faculty of color is a little bit hard to read if you look at the institutional research website, because faculty who come in as international faculty, once they become naturalized, they're coded as US citizens. And so it's hard to see where those lines are. But I can tell you that according to institutional research, somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 or 16% of our faculty are listed as faculty of color. And I think another maybe 2 or 3%, and I don't have those numbers in my head, off the top of my head, but another 2 or 3% as international. But again, that number, you sort of, that number travels around. When we initiated the diversity advocacy program for tenured faculty searches, this is a program that trains tenured faculty to serve on tenure track faculty search committees. And the main goal is to teach them how to make sure that we are attracting a diverse candidate pool and how to interrupt implicit bias when they see it or when they sense it. And so ever since we've been doing that work, we've seen the number of incoming tenure track and visiting faculty numbers increase in terms of their domestic and international diversity. And I don't have this number right in my head, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% of our hires in the past 3 years of tenure track or visiting faculty have been either domestic faculty of color or international faculty. Now, that sounds like a strong number, and I'm excited about that number. But remember, every year we don't hire a lot of faculty. It might be 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, and so the numbers are growing. They're growing one little bit at a time, but it's going to take time to be in a place where we actually have what might be considered a critical mass. I hope that answers your question.
Great. So I know Scott O'Connell chimed in, just saying that this is such valuable work. So thank you, Kimberly, for today. And just gave some suggestions for further topics for us to be able to explore at future presentations. So that's definitely something we'll be taking note of, Scott. And being able to kind of address those specifically around microaggressions and practices on how allies can be effective disruptors. So I think those are 2 very great ideas, and we'll certainly be looking at what's next in this series. So thank you. Let's see. Oh, we've got plenty of questions coming in now. Here we go. So Letitia asks, how is the university doing a hard look at its systems to root out racism that has been built in? This seems so challenging to me as a beneficiary of white privilege that I'm only beginning to understand. Thanks for launching this forum.
That's a really good question, and I'm going to apologize in advance. I wish I had a good answer to that. What I'm doing right now, and I've really just begun this work, and so I don't have any results to report to you. I use the information from the climate survey and the focus group. That's a good, really good, solid starting point. But I look at policies. One example was hiring. Okay, when I first came to campus, I looked at the diversity of our faculty and our staff, and I felt that this was an area that I believed I had a strategy that would work on our campus. And so I worked with Carl Schonberg, and I worked with Evelyn Jennings, and also with Lisa Kenya, who's the VP of Employee and Community Relations, and Colleen Manley, who's the Director of Human Resources. So I called together these groups of people, and I presented them with my idea for the Diversity Advocates program that I just described. One of the challenges was that when people were writing position descriptions, so let's say you have a position description, you want to hire someone to teach a sociology course, okay? And the job is going to, and so they really need somebody to teach Sociology 101, the intro course, and they really need somebody to do research methods, and they also need somebody who does something with institutions, okay? So you say the successful candidate will have some experience doing these things, and the teaching load is 3 courses per semester and so on and so forth, okay? But I suggested both to the people who were writing the position descriptions, and I worked with them, and to the parties I just mentioned, that why don't we mention something about our value for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and say something about the successful candidate having had some experience working with a diverse student body, or developing courses that addressed issues of inequity, right? What if we said we would, you have to teach these 3 kinds of things, but we also are looking for someone who would be interested in doing this other kind of work, right? And so, people scratched their head and said, well, maybe we can do that. And so ultimately we started doing it. And now, not only do almost all positions ask for that, but we actually ask for people who are applying for tenure track faculty positions, and most visiting positions too, to write a statement that describes how, what experience or what values they have that align with what our values are as an institution, not just in terms of our teaching and our learning and our, our close mentoring in small groups with students and all that, but also our value for inclusive community. And that has really made a difference. And not only are we attracting a more diverse applicant pool for people who are applying for our positions, which is what we're after, right? If you don't have people in the applicant pool, you can never hire them, right? But even people who identify as white, middle class, or upper middle class, new faculty, even those folks who ended up being hired, which is fantastic, right? They understand our value and they're committed to doing this work, right? And so so that's one of the things that we're doing. We're thinking about hiring. So I said earlier, we don't hire people based on their race or their gender identity. We simply can't. And I would object if it were suggested that we start doing that. But we do want people who share our institutional values. And if you bring people on who don't share our institutional values, there's no way they're going to last very long. So tell people what those values are. Allow them to access resources so that they can say, do I want to work at a place like St. Lawrence, or would I rather work in a different place? So that's one of the ways that we've done it. And again, I think that program has been very successful, although, little tiny bites every year. I have 3 VPs sitting on the University Diversity Committee, and I work with them on ways to interrupt bias or or come up with ways to create a more inclusive community in their workspaces and with their employees. One of the things that I haven't done much of yet, I've talked to a few people, but I need to talk, but I'm planning this year to have conversations with all the VPs and all the department chairs and all the program directors about developing their own diversity and inclusion action plan. What are some things that they know that that they have gaps in? Where are the gaps they recognize, right? And then come up with programming to help fill those gaps. I don't pretend that these are all the things you need to do to interrupt systemic racism or systemic bias at an institution like St. Lawrence. I know there's more. And I brainstorm with my colleagues across the nation and also in the associated colleges. It's difficult work and it's hard to wrap your mind around sometimes, and I'm always open to suggestions. But this is how the work begins. I think that's the best I can say right now.
Awesome. So another question we have, and I'm excited for this one, is what diversity and inclusion initiatives are you most excited about this year?
Okay, so one of the things I started doing last year that it was a big task, but I loved it, right? And that was visiting all the FYPs. And so at the end of last summer of 2019, I wrote to Sarah Barber, who's our associate dean for first year program, and I said, I think I would like to visit all the FYPs. And she said, there's like 35 of them. And I said, well, I'll visit as many as I can. Now, I can't just walk into an FYP and say, hi, everybody. We're going to talk about this today, because faculty, build their own course plans and their own curriculums. But I worked with the faculty, and I ended up making it to probably a third, maybe a little more than a third of the FYPs. And even in those FYPs where I only was allotted, like in one FYP, they said you have half an hour. And I said, okay, I'll do what I can. But we ended up talking for an hour and a half because every time I said, well, I know I'm at the end of my time here. And the professor kept saying, no, say more. And so we ended up having a really, really engaged conversation. I love working with students. So that's one of the things I'm really excited about. The faculty staff group I mentioned, the CARE group, Committed to Action for Racial Equity, they are doing such exciting programming right now. And I'm really excited about that. And I guess I can take credit for pulling that group together. But then, when my work got, really a little bit wacky over the summer, and I had to step away from that work because I just didn't have the time. They just kept going like little machines, and they're just doing all kinds of amazing things. So I'm excited about their work, and I'm excited about re-engaging with them when I can, because they're so smart and so passionate about this work. I am excited about the challenge of doing programming over Zoom. Okay, so I think most of us I have two hats. I have one hat in student life and one hat in academic affairs, and I take them on and put them off all the time. And so my student life hat, we generally prefer to do programming work with students face-to-face. We like putting students together and putting them in groups and giving them things to think about. We like seeing their faces and their expressions, seeing their excitement. And even when they disagree with us, we like learning from those disagreements, right? And so we don't have a lot of that through Zoom. But Zoom gives you a different kind of experience, right? You can put people in breakout rooms where they actually see each other's faces much more closely than they would if they were in their little groups when you're doing programming. And so I'm excited to see what Zoom program what we can actually do with Zoom programming. And of course, my big thing is the Diversity and Inclusion Strategic Action Plan. I've been working on that and it's not just me, it's the whole diversity committee, of which Victoria is a member. We've been working on this for a year and a half now. And we're almost at the stage where we can actually launch it, and we actually have targets. We're working on what are realistic targets right now. And this is a plan that has the potential to really transform who we are as a community, not just students, but faculty and staff too. And it won't be without disagreement, and it won't be without confusion. I'm sure there'll be some confusion as we progress, because this is all new territory for all of us. But I am just really excited about the potential for this to not only transform where we are and what good work that we can do supporting one another, but also, to teach us something about what we didn't know that we don't know. Okay, what are some areas that I think we're doing pretty good on, but actually we're not. I don't have the answer to that now, but I might in a month, right? So this is all really exciting work. All of it is great, and I, of course, doing these webinars with you all, and working with Victoria and Joe. I love doing this. So all of it's good for me.
Yes, indeed, Kimberly. This is certainly great. So our next question is from Sohel. Hi, Sohel. It's great to have you on with us this evening. And his question is, when it comes to inclusion, how do you foster an environment where people who come from different backgrounds know you value their ideas, not just among the students, but also between students and community? And what initiatives can SLU undertake to create meaningful connection across difference?
That is an excellent couple of questions, Sohel, and basically those are the questions that underscore all of our work, right? I think probably 99.9% of the personnel, of the student, faculty, and staff who are currently at St. Lawrence or who've ever been at St. Lawrence, right, are good people who care about one another. But without understanding how to engage around difference, and especially with those high levels of discomfort when talking about issues of difference. When I was growing up, right, my mother said to me, and I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. So my mother used to tell us, there are certain topics that we just won't talk about, okay? And one of them was politics. We couldn't talk politics. And one of them was race. We couldn't talk about race when there were people who weren't African American in our home. We could talk about race with other Black people, but not when there were not non-Black people in the home. And I never, may she rest in peace, I never did get a chance to ask her why that was, but I think I know the answer. And it's because there's so much potential for conflict and anger. And so why engage the anger? People just feel so passionately that they're right or someone else is wrong. And why have that in your home? But if we don't make an effort to engage, respectfully around these issues, we're never going to be the community that we aspire to be. And I think people want to be good people. They want to be considered to be good people. And so they either avoid the discussions because they're afraid of hurting someone else or saying something that reveals that they're ill-informed or something, or that insults somebody. Or they think they understand it well enough and they don't want to engage around the topic, because why engage? And I think the first step is to urge people, urge your friends, urge your classmates, and even urge your faculty members to participate in some of this programming. And I can tell you that, I can't tell you that every faculty member is engaged around this, but I can tell you many faculty members are engaged around these topics. Those workshops that we had this past summer, Dialogues on Race, which were designed to provide information about race, especially in light of all the things that were going on this summer, right? We ended up doing 3 of those workshops, and a total of nearly 70 people participated in those workshops. And we had a waiting list, and we're still planning on having sort of one that captured the ones who wanted to go but weren't able to make it. And so people want to have these conversations. So providing the opportunity to do so, giving guidelines on how to engage respectfully. Sometimes people don't know how to engage respectfully. Some of us grew up learning that debating, right, proving that you're right is the way to engage. But debating is not very useful for this kind of a dialogue. We need to listen to one another, and we need to consider the possibility that we might be wrong and we might have something to learn. Debating is about winning. Dialogue is about learning from one another, and that's where we need to be. So I would say coming to more of these, practicing more of these, and inviting your friends, even friends who might not otherwise be inclined to come to some of these programs. Just say, I'm going to this thing, why don't you come with me? We'll do it together. I think that can go a long way toward building an inclusive community. I hope I answered your question. But you can contact me afterwards if I didn't.
Awesome. So this next one might be for Joe and myself, but it's centered around reunions. And it's asking about the diversity among our volunteer committees and how we're taking a look at that. And so, Joe, I'll let you answer first, and then certainly I can chime in as well.
Sure thing. So this question came to us from Heidi Hansen from the class of 1970. Heidi, I hope that you are well. We miss seeing you in person. And Heidi's question is, what, if any, effort has the university employed for reunions? How can the Alumni Executive Committee infuse diversity? I was pleased that for KDS 50th anniversary in 2019, many KDS sisters, various color and sexual orientation attended, and then goes on to ask about including people from outside the different race or sexual orientation on the committees for reunion. And I'll start with that second part, which is that I do think we can do a better job of stewarding along our reunion leaders to make sure that they are breaking outside of their own clusters of friends and people that they have fond memories of on campus, to ensure that we are being more inclusive. And that's something that I think Victoria and I are committed to, and we can commit to as we head towards Reunion 2021, which also is Reunion 2020, all merged into one big mega reunion in July of 2021. Very much looking forward to that. Going back to the original part of the question, though, that Heidi asked, and I lost it here, and so I'll just say that I think from the Alumni Executive Council perspective, I want to give kudos to Sajana Blank, who I believe is or was on tonight, taking in the webinar. Sajana is a member of the class of 2008 and is leading the newly formed Diversity Inclusion Committee that is part of Alumni Council with under President North and President Trillian's leadership. Over the last few years, we've seen a nice bump in more diversity on the council, which we're excited about. We know it needs to continue. And so President North has moved some of the years around to allow for more inclusion from more recent class years, where we've seen an influx in diversity, as Kimberly pointed out earlier, that we've tripled the amount of international students since 2003, doubled since of students of color since 2003. And so there's a cluster of diversity that we really want to tap into now in the alumni networks, but they're young alumni. And so we need to spread it around. And under President North's leadership, she's already taking care and working on that. And Sajana and Sohel, who is a student delegate, Sohel asked a question a few moments ago, incredible leadership from them on the council. And I have nothing but confidence that we will continue to grow thanks to their strong efforts. And Heidi, just for whatever it's worth, that 2019 reunion was a bash, well played from the KDS team, celebrating 50. And without going into it, obviously KDS an important role to play around diversity and inclusion at St. Lawrence from Heidi's time on campus and taking some very critical steps.
So I think we can probably finish up, and I think that takes care of part of this this last question that we have. And it's, how have other bodies like the Board of Trustees and the Alumni Executive Council contributed to and collaborated with you and others on campus around these issues?
So that's a really good question. Thank you for submitting that one. Let me start with the board. The Board of Trustees, especially under the leadership of Marion Roach Smith, was very, very central to the process of the Presidential Commission on Diversity, both the year-long process and the drafting of the report. So the board has really been in the front lines on this diversity and inclusion work. I have addressed the board since I've been here for about 3.5 years. I've addressed them on several occasions, providing workshops, information, They have been amazing partners with me in this work. So that's another reason I'm glad to be here. Not all boards are as supportive of this kind of work or any kind of sort of on the ground work at an institution as this one is. We're very fortunate to have the board that we do. As far as alumni exec, I have, again, addressed alumni exec on several occasions since I've been here, but especially since the alumni exec group built the diversity and inclusion subcommittee. You know, I've been working with them ever since that body convened on, you know, coming up with ideas for trainings for alumni exec members, coming up with other kinds of ideas for programming. They have been once again very much in the front lines of this work and want to continue to be supportive. In fact, they asked me recently if they could partner with me on developing some of these programs, and so I'm excited to hear what they have to contribute to this work. We have some people who are very passionate about this work, who want this work to get done, and who want to be part of the solution. And I just can't say enough how grateful I am to have this community to work with.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank everyone for your time this evening. This was certainly an excellent kickoff to our webinar series. Definitely be on the lookout for what's coming next because we are definitely having more webinars and more forums and more opportunities to engage. And we're always open for feedback. And so you can reach me, Victoria Lederer, with any questions or ideas or ways you want to engage as an alum with this work. I'm happy to connect with you on that. And certainly, I think we'll have this recording, and we'll also have Kimberly's resources that were in the PowerPoint to be able to send to our participants today. So those are a few final notes I have. I don't know if anyone else today has anything else they want to share before we sign off.
I would just like to jump in very quickly to echo the thanks that have already been shared, but also major kudos to Kimberly. It's such important work going on campus, and I know she tries to share some of the credit and she does it so well. She's so gracious, but she keeps us focused and centered on our goals and mission, and I just really appreciate all the energy she's put in. And now to be teaming with her, we're going to be making some real inroads here. I would encourage those who attended and who are watching this perhaps after the fact, send us your ideas on what topics you'd like to hear about. I think we can set the course and the agenda, but we'd love to hear from you on things that you'd like to learn more about, hear more about. And so please don't hesitate to reach out. We're looking forward to the second iteration coming very soon. So Kimberly, keep up the good work, and thank you to everyone for watching tonight. We really appreciate it.
And I want to echo the thanks. I've enjoyed having a chance to talk with you, but I've also really enjoyed hearing your questions and your comments. You are what make this a special place. And I'm very lucky to have partners like Victoria and Joe and the Diversity Committee and so many others. So this is hard work. This is challenging work, but when we all take a share in it and work together, it's work that can be very joyful. So thank you.
Couldn't say it any better than that. Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, everyone. Be well. We'll look forward to being together soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.